AcuBase demo part 3, how to create an invoice in AcuBase. Okay, so we're back in our patient overview screen. There are several places where you can create an invoice in AcuBase, and the most efficient one, I'd say, is probably from the patient's file. So no matter where you are in the patient's file, no matter which tab you're in, right now I'm on the overviews tab, but I can switch between all the tabs, and I always have my new invoice button available here next to the edit patient. So you can go ahead, of course, assuming that you've set up billing preferences for your patient, you can go ahead and click on new invoice. This will prompt you to enter a date of invoice. By default, it will be today's date, but you can change that, of course. Click OK, and there is your invoice. And as you've noticed, we have now moved from being in the Patients tab to the Invoices tab. So what we're looking at right now is the invoice area of AcuBase. So what we're on is the superbill view of your invoice, and of course the CPT codes I had pre-entered in my patient's case detail, as well as the ICD codes are populating this invoice. And down here under products is where you would put your products from your inventory. Your inventory list is going to show up here as a drop menu under product ID. Always make sure to put in a quantity. You can also apply a discount here. The discount is a percentage. So if the percentage that you wish to apply is not in here, of course, edit it. But this is where you would do that. So where we are is the superbill view of the invoice. As you notice, there are 4 tabs across here. We have the overview screen of that invoice. This is where you can change the address. If you had multiple addresses, you could change the default one to one of the other addresses available here. You also have 2 boxes here for comments in regards to that invoice. One of them will print, one of them will not. Both these boxes will also be available on the Payment tab, which is the last tab of your invoice. Then, like I said, we have the superbill view of that invoice. Notice that you can go straight to your SOAP notes from here if you wanted to, after creating an invoice, create a SOAP note or any kind of note to your patient's record. You don't have to go back to your patient and go to the activity tab of your patient. You can just click here to have immediate access to that area. You can also print the envelope for the insurance company from here. Then we have the CMS view of that invoice. This is where you'll find the Align CMS button. So when you first start printing your CMS form, you may want to play around with this alignment here. If you end up having some discrepancy in the alignment between the bottom and the top of the page, meaning the bottom looks like it needs to move up and the bottom looks like it needs to move down and the top needs to move up, then you're going to need to take a look at your actual printer settings and see if you can fix that from there. This alignment button here will just allow you to align up, down, left, and right. Okay, so if at any time you wanted to look at the CMS form in detail, you would want to click on the Insurance Payer 1 sub-tab. This here looks very much like your CMS template that you filled in under your patient's case detail. However, this is not your CMS template for this patient's case. This is what this particular invoice looks like. So if something was wrong here, let's say this is not my insured's ID number, you could of course make that modification here on this record because you would want this particular invoice to be correct. But beyond that, you would want to go back to your patient's case detail and fix it on the template so that future invoice will also be correct. There's an easy way to go back to your patient's file is by clicking on the name here. That will take you right back to their file. So now, if by any chance you had set up primary and secondary templates under the case detail. And let's say this invoice has been invoiced to the primary insurance and has been rejected. And so now you have to submit the same invoice to the secondary insurance. What you want to do before you print, you want to make sure that you check this little bubble number 2 and then go ahead and print, and it will then pull the preferences that you've set up for the secondary. Make sure to come back and recheck it to yes, because it will stay on whatever was checked last. And in most cases, you want it to be on the 1 bubble. All right, and then we have, excuse me, you have the payment screen here. So the payment screen, you'll notice here that you have an apply lump sum payment. This apply lump sum payment button is great for cash patients that are going to pay their full invoice as they leave. You just simply click on that here. It will put in the date, today's date. And then here you can type however it is that they've paid. Let's say check. Whoops. Click OK, and this is going to distribute the payment throughout the entire invoice. Now, let's say that the procedures are actually you're waiting for a payment from the insurance company, so your patient is not going to pay for that. But let's say you have quite a few products here under the product list. You would still want to use the apply lump sum payment and then just simply delete these lines for the CPT codes. That way you don't have to go line by line to apply the payment to your product. You can then wait for the insurance payment to come in. If there is a copay, you can go ahead and set up your copay here in one of the lines below the lines of treatment code. That's how I recommend doing it. This is not how it has to be done, but I recommend that copay are entered below the line of item and that you leave this open for the insurance payment. Once the insurance payment comes in, make sure to check auto enter adjustment to no. And when your insurance payment comes in, they're probably going to pay a partial payment. Let's enter 60 here. And we'll do 20 here. And so in the end, when everybody has paid whatever it is they're going to pay, insurance has paid the max they will pay, patient has paid their copay, there may be still an outstanding balance. For us here, it's $30. You can check here and take a look at what that outstanding balance is, and then just simply enter it here in the adjustment column. That way, when you do your deposit slip, you'll know that this $30 here will be in the adjustment column. You can also qualify it here under paid by as an adjustment, but it's not necessary because on the deposit slip there is a column for the adjustment. That's how I recommend doing payments. We also have an apply credit button that will be a separate video as well. It's a little bit more complex, so it will just have its video of its own. This would be for people who prepay packages and things like that. All right, so that was creating an invoice from the Patients tab. Now you notice that under the Invoice tab, we also have a new invoice button. Now this new invoice button originally was created to be able to create blank invoice that are not attached to patient's record in case someone comes in and just buys a supplement, or maybe comes in, they had a gift certificate but they're not yet a patient and they may never be a patient and you don't want to set up a file for them, but you do want to record their visit. So, or at least if you sell a supplement, you want to make sure to get that taken off from your inventory. So when you click on the new invoice button here, it actually tells you that if you want this to be attached to a patient's record, you'll need to click on the update button to get their billing preferences to come across. If I don't choose to attach it to a patient ID, then it's just simply a blank, not a blank, you would just put that patient's first name and last name so that you have a record of their visit here. And if you have multiple provider, you probably want to select your provider here so that you know who sold that product or who gave the treatment. And then you can go ahead and move on to Superbill and either record the purchase of the product or the treatment accordingly. And then that's it. You're going to record the payment, but this invoice here will not be attached to a specific patient. Now, if we wanted this invoice to actually be attached to a patient, then what we would do is click on New Invoice and select the patient from the drop menu where it says Patient ID. And then after you've done that, you want to click on the Update button here in the upper right corner, right above that yellow bubble. Click on the Update button, and that will bring their billing preferences across. You see now that I have my treatment codes and my ICD-9 codes that have been preset in my patient's case. So that's another way, of course, of doing an invoice. It depends on where you are in the database. When you do it from the patient's file, as you've noticed, it's a bit quicker because you don't have to click on that update button and you don't have to select your patient's name from the drop menu. There is yet another way to do invoicing from the calendar, and we'll look at that when we'll be looking at the calendar. So this is pretty much it for invoices. The next video will be on reports and inventory. These are pretty short, so I will lump them together. Some buttons here that I wanted to point out is that you'll see in AcuBase, mostly the green and the red button, you can open multiple windows. When you click on the green button, you open another window in AcuBase. So I could, for example, be on my patient's tab here, while in this window I remain in my Invoice tab. So one thing to be very careful of is take a look when you're ready to close one of the windows, one of the extra windows that you've opened. Take a look at what it says here at the top. Any additional windows will say AcuBase /2/3, 4, etc. Make sure that these are okay to close because they're additional windows. Make sure you don't close your main window. It will just shut down your database. It's not a big deal. You can always reopen it, but it may be annoying. So just pay attention to which window you're closing. All right, so that's it for invoicing, and I'll see you for part 3.